Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Controlled Interests Gamecast, a video game podcast focused on good vibes, thoughtful criticism, and celebrating the things we love about them. I am your host, Jerrad Wyche, and thank you for joining me for episode 278. Let's hop right into it. The Quickie news. Sony announces via the PlayStation blog price changes for the PS5, PS5 Pro, and PlayStation Portal. What we have here is the PS5 is going from $550 to $650. The digital edition of the PS5 is going from $500 to $600. These are all in US territory, by the way. The PS5 Pro is going from $750 to $900, and the PlayStation Portal is going from $200 to $250. On the blog, they state, quote, "With continued pressures in the global economic landscape, we've made the decision to increase the prices of PS5 Pro, PS5 Pro, and PlayStation Portal Remote Player globally. We know that the price changes impact our community, and after careful evaluation, we found that this was a necessary step to ensure we can continue delivering innovative, high-quality gaming experiences to players worldwide. The updated recommended retail prices for PS5 consoles are effective starting April 2nd, 2026. Now, this is huge news, obviously, as things continue to get more expensive for all Americans in every avenue of life, whether that be groceries or the video game hobby. This is huge. This was inevitable. I think people who thought this wasn't going to happen kind of living under a rock. I'm curious to see if this ends up happening with Nintendo prices for the Switch 2, if they can kind of stave away the price hikes because of the way they handle their manufacturing. I'll be curious to see. This is a bummer for the hobby, for the medium, because the more expensive these consoles become, the harder it is for the average American to hop into the hobby. And I know that not everyone needs to own the newest console, but these are getting prohibitively expensive. The PS5 being $650, crazy. The digital edition being $600. This is the first time in my life where buying all of the consoles at launch actually saved me money in the long run. And that's crazy to think about. I was fortunate enough to be able to afford the Xbox Series X, the PlayStation 5, and most recently the Switch 2 at launch. And it looks like I would have saved money essentially on every one of those purchases. As with most things, with inflation and price hikes, very rarely do we see the prices come drastically down. This has some ramifications in a couple of areas. One, this is going to affect GTA sales at launch, because people who are going to want to hop in who haven't owned a new console but want to hop in to play GTA 6 in the best way possible, they're going to come to a quick realization that the modern consoles are very expensive. So I'm curious to see how that plays out. And also, this seems like another check mark that showcases that maybe these consoles are farther away than we thought, the next generation. That being whatever the next Xbox is called, as well as the PS6. I can't see in a world where these next-gen consoles launch at exorbitant prices that they're near as successful as these companies want them to be. And maybe they wait out the current presidency, maybe they wait for the economy in general to get back to a better place, which will be years from now, obviously. But it is unfortunate, and this was inevitable. Sony was gonna do this. It was just a matter of time, and like I previously mentioned, it's going to be curious to see if Nintendo follows suit, and if they have to raise the price for the Switch 2, which is also kind of, I wouldn't say necessarily struggling to sell, but it's not hitting the same pace as the original Switch. Pokopia seems to be helping that out a lot. I'm sure whatever fall titles they have coming out will also do the trick, as well as the upcoming release of Super Mario Galaxy Movie. We will see. These price hikes are going to continue. We've talked about in the gaming space about prices for video games themselves going up. And Nintendo recently announced that the digital versions of their first-party games are going to be differently priced than the physical releases. And that is, that's nice to hear. But is that going to be offsetting the increased price for a Switch 2 on the other side of that? So time will tell. Inflation has been inevitable this last year plus, and it's unfortunate that it's hitting the gaming space the way it has, a hobby that is already a bit of a luxury to most people, considering the entry point for the medium itself. So we'll see what happens moving forward, but just so you know, Sony has increased the prices for the PS5, PS5 Digital Edition, PS5 Pro, and the PlayStation Portal. The PS5 Pro being $900 is just crazy to me, but I just, it's fascinating to see how that plays out. Next up, the topic of the show, I wanted to talk about why early access games aren't for me. You know, a conversation about why I'm no longer interested in playing games before their official release. And this topic came to me most recently post the Xbox showcase that they did, where they unveiled that Hades 2 is finally coming to both PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series consoles. And I did not touch that game at all because I did not want to play it early access. There's a couple of other cases, such as No Rest for the Wicked, and a multitude of other games that come out in early access. It's a rather common thing these days. And over the years, I've kind of backed off from jumping into these early access titles for a myriad of reasons, and I've kind of listed some of them, but I wanted to talk about it because I know for some people early access is exciting and it's fun, but for me and the type of gamer I am, I've just realized that it's not for me and I don't want to experience them anymore. So first up, I understand and respect the purpose of these release cadences. For smaller teams, especially smaller indie studios, I get getting active feedback from the community can really elevate a game as a product in its end result. We saw that with the original Hades and how critically well received that was following an extended early access period. But at the end of the day, you know, it results in a better product, a better end product when it finally releases. So I don't really feel the need to play it early. I feel like I'm getting a lesser and incomplete experience, which by definition I am. It's early access. It hasn't hit 1.0 release. They're going to be tweaking things. Now there's a conversation to be had that even games that release in quote unquote 1.0 aren't finished products with day one patches or over the course of a year post release. It gets multiple additions to the game, additional modes, additional accessibility features, and a year after it is a much better product. So who's to say its initial release wasn't some sort of early access in and of its own? But you know what I'm talking about here. Fighting off FOMO is one of the toughest things in games, and anything in media in general. Your friends or people you see online experiencing things and you want to be a part of the conversation. But I've trained myself, specifically with early access games, to understand I'm not missing out on the version of the game I actually want to play. I want to play the complete, well-rounded, well-polished experience. I don't want to be battling through numerous bugs and issues and, difficulty balances. I no longer fear missing out on something I actually don't want to play, and I think that's a nice place to get to, and I'm happy to be in that place because I'm as guilty as anybody else of trying to fight out the FOMO and eventually giving in because you want to be a part of the conversation, like I previously mentioned. And once you sit back and think about it for more than a couple of seconds, you understand that you aren't missing out. And when you eventually get to the end game and the 1.0 release, it's going to be worth it. And I'd much rather play a crafted demo that gives me a taste of the game if I'm on the fence about whether or not it's for me, as opposed to early access where I'm not even getting a taste of what the actual final product will be. And that's another thing, is I think early access is we're seeing the resurgence of demos, thankfully, in the last year or so. But I do think early access kind of was put in place as a way for, the pessimist in me believes I'm paying for alpha and beta access to test a game. And that doesn't feel great. And like I said, I totally understand where indie devs are coming from, and I'm not trying to bash them for this, but for me specifically, in my tastes and what I want from video games, early access is just not for me. And this goes with the idea of, I personally, and I know this is a conversation that's had about every year in terms of, do remakes qualify for, game of the year, just end of year game awards, and should they count? And there's a whole conversation of, well, is it a remake? Is it a remaster? What part of that scale does it land on? And with early access games, for me personally, I think it's a easy conversation of, no, they don't they shouldn't be in those conversations because they aren't a finished product. I just don't, no matter how good it can be, I just don't understand how that can qualify. But that's just my personal opinion. I know people are probably going to consider that crazy, and it's like, well, it's a game that released and people can buy it and play it, so why shouldn't it count? But I'm just providing my perspective on it. So thank you for listening to why I just don't enjoy early access games. There was a time where it was exciting and new, but now just I don't want to play the worst version of the game. In all honesty, I want to play the best version. Give me what the best you have to offer as a developer and as a writer and as a crafter, and I'll wait for it. It might be years post early access launch, but I'm willing to wait. There's plenty of games that come out every year, and that's another aspect of it is I wonder if it hurts marketing, because they market the early access versions of these games, and then there comes a stagnation in interest the more a game is out there. By the time it reaches 1.0 release, it doesn't feel like an event for a lot of people. It just feels like, oh, another update, which is unfortunate because the 1.0 release should mark a significant milestone in the game's development process. And unfortunately, it just feels like another check mark they're hitting for a lot of people out there where it's like, oh, the 1.0 release came out. Cool, I've already played 40 hours of this game. It seems like they're not adding too much that is worthwhile for me to hop back into after planting myself on the couch or on my chair and devoting so much time to it in early access. I'll be interested to see how things play out moving forward in terms of how early access is approached, whether it's, free entry, paid as it has been, and how gamers kind of gravitate or move themselves away from it as the traditional demo is kind of coming back into the fold in a major way, like I said earlier. We'll see what happens. Now, this week's What I Played is going to be more chunky than usual. I wanted to cover two major games that I've been playing, Marathon and Pokemon Pokopia. One I have a lot more time in than the other. Pokemon Pokopia, I've already put in about 60 to 70 hours, quite a lot. Whereas with Marathon, I'm still dipping my toes in a little bit. I'm about 4 hours in, give or take. And they're very different games, very different experiences. But I wanted to, shed light on how I'm feeling about both of these games and whether or not I am going to see them through much longer than I already have. Now let's start with Marathon. Like I said, I'm about 4 hours in. I'm almost exclusively using the Assassin Shell. During the server slam period when I was playing with a friend, I used the Healer Medic class, which I don't remember off the top of my head. Forgive me for that. But now, and you'll see why I'm doing this, I'm using the Assassin Shell, which comes with a cloak ability to turn yourself invisible for a set amount of time, as well as this ultimate that provides a big AoE of smoke. So it's very much about getting in, getting out, not being noticed. And the reason I've kind of gravitated towards this shell is because I'm exclusively doing solo queues. So I'm entering into these maps where it's one player teams, me against someone, against someone, against someone. So the Assassin Shell kind of provides a lot of advantages in that setting. The missions, I've noticed, are providing the carrot on the stick for me to keep me engaged and wanting to play successive runs, regardless of whether I exfil, which is the word they use for escaping alive, or not. So whether or not I get killed and fail early, the missions, which I found, at least some of the ones, the early game missions, don't require you to exfil. All you have to do is complete the tasks, and once the run is over, whether that's exfilling or being eliminated by another player, you complete the mission, and that is a good design decision, in my opinion. It's too early to see what type of staying power this game has for me, but the slivers of narrative via the environmental storytelling and the faction cutscenes are providing enough world building and lore to keep me on the hook for the time being. I'm a bit hesitant to try duos without friends on comms. I just don't really enjoy playing with randoms all that much. It's just not something I've now that I think about it, as long as I've played video games, I've never really enjoyed playing with randoms. It's always playing with friends. And even if I'm not playing with friends, if it's a multiplayer title, I'm never on open communication, public communication, talking with people. The early days of Call of Duty kind of had me avoid that at all costs. And if you're familiar with that, there's a lot of hate speech and bigotry and just idiotic people. And it's a bummer because I know in other gaming communities there is that, but there is also people just looking to connect. And I do want to have some of those really interesting moments in extraction shooters that people talk about and you see go viral on social media all the time. But I'm in a weird place because I am enjoying solo queuing and kind of outsmarting and outmaneuvering my opponents and getting in and getting out. And there's been plenty of runs where I don't even run into anybody, or if I do, they're so far away that I let them go about their own business and do what I'm doing. I'm not seeking violence for violence sake unless a mission requires me to engage with other players. And I like that because I get to approach it the way I want to. The world is fascinating. I love good sci-fi. The design, albeit was once stolen from an artist who thankfully got uh, appropriate compensation for what had happened. It's just a cool looking world. I hope one day it stays around long enough for them to release a single player campaign because I think there's so much meat on the bone. But that being said, if they never do, I'm enjoying my time. I think the $40 entry price is right at the top of what I would pay for this experience. And I think, in my opinion, it would have been much more successful if it was free to play and they leaned into the cosmetic microtransactions, but conversation for another day. I am there, there's a lot of conversations taking place right now about Marathon's budget. It's reportedly 250 million plus, which is crazy and kind of a sign of the inflated budgets of AAA video games these days. And the player numbers are good, they're not great. So I'm both worried for the the longevity of Marathon and Bungie as a studio. The first thing we covered in this episode is PlayStation raising the price of their consoles. We've seen them shut down studios recently. They're not the only ones. Xbox has done the same, and plenty of other third-party publishers have closed down studios. We're in a very scary and tough time for video games, even more so for multiplayer games. Another story I didn't cover, Fortnite developer Epic just laid off 1,000 people. Fortnite. Marathon could only dream of reaching Fortnite numbers, and they had to lay off that many people. Well, I shouldn't say they had to. They decided to. There's plenty of ways that these companies bringing in these mass amounts of money, hand over fist, like especially Fortnite does, to retain their workforce. So I shouldn't say they had to. They chose to let go of those people, which is really unfortunate. So I'm hoping Marathon has legs. I'm curious to see what the first expansion is like. I don't know if I'll ever check out other shells, if I'm being completely honest. I like the assassin gameplay and solo queues. And maybe eventually, by the time I record the next podcast in a couple of weeks, I'll have more experience in queues with more people, whether that be with friends or with randoms, and I'll report back. But for the time being, I'm enjoying Marathon. It's providing both the shooter experience I often yearn for. At my roots, I am a fan of a good shooter, and the sci-fi elements are awesome, and the art direction, obviously, like I talked about before, incredible. So interested to see where this goes. But 4 hours in, I would say I am satisfied and very much enjoying my solo experience in Marathon. Next up, the meat and potatoes of what I've been playing, Pokemon Pokopia. So I'm about 60 to 70-ish hours in. I didn't look up my exact time, but I remember last time I checked, I was hovering in the 50s, and I've played much more since then. So assumably 60 to 70 hours, maybe a little bit more. I've completed the story, and my spoiler-free feelings are that it managed to really capture the nostalgic joy of Pokemon fans, while also telling an original, unique, and risky, in my opinion, story in a familiar world and territory. When you roll credits, it gives the player purpose and agency to tackle the post-game how they see fit, and that's something I really appreciate about it. It lets you know, no, this is the reason you should continue playing from both a narrative and design perspective, And I think that's something that doesn't take a whole lot of effort to fit in. But with a game like this, where the post game is often as much game of the gameplay time people spend in it as the narrative, if the game tends to have a narrative, Animal Crossing doesn't really have a narrative through line outside of you paying back your debt to Tom Nook. I really appreciate it, and it goes a long way, and it manages to keep you interested. Speaking of managing things, I do think it managed to take the parts of Animal Crossing and Pokemon I personally find so joyous and engaging. The stylizing, designing from Animal Crossing, the collecting from Pokemon, and the relationship building of both. In both Animal Crossing and Pokemon, you build these relationships, these bonds. Sometimes for comedic value in terms of maybe getting the villagers in your Animal Crossing island you don't really like and having to try to replace them with the ones you do. Or in Pokemon, where you befriend these creatures and you find the team that works for you and you train them and learn the world around you alongside them. And I think that's really special. And this game manages to take all of that and put it into one lovely, well-rounded product. Once I rolled credits, I immediately had these grand machinations of what each of the game's main areas should look like. This grassy terrain, I can build these huts that sit on these pillars. I can develop these roadways and these rivers and these waterfalls. It's awesome to have that once you roll credits of, no, I have all these desires to continue playing this game. Not only did Pokopia have these dilapidated and rundown areas players had to restore with their own, decisions and layouts in mind, but it also gave a blank landscape of sorts that is entirely shaped by what the player decides to build. It's an area you get access to. Once again, I want to avoid spoilers. This game is relatively new, and considering it switched to exclusive, I know some people haven't had the opportunity to dive in, so I want to avoid spoilers as much as possible. But it is nice that they give you these areas that you kind of have to makeshift work together, and if you want to completely redesign, it takes a lot of work. Then they also provide this additional area that is literally a blank slate with very minimal terrain elements that you can design as you see fit. And I think that was a very smart choice. Finding Pokemon with different abilities is crucial to making progress in the game, but it has a double purpose of filling out the Pokédex, and I'm curious to see what the reward is. I could have easily Googled it, but I'm kind of avoiding that because I think we've lost a lot of discovery in the modern era of games. I am guilty of looking up things, so I'm trying to do my best with this game specifically, where I don't know what happens when you complete the Pokédex. I didn't know how the story unfolded, and I have really had a blast with that, so I'm curious to see what happens with the Pokédex. And with the different abilities for the Pokemon, you need them. You need, fire types to smelt clay into brick, smelt, ore into ingots. You need the strong fighting types to help you build. You need the flying types to chop wood. It's really cool how they manage to take all of the different parts of Pokemon and adapt them to a cozy builder like Pokopia. The building and designing is as complex or simplistic as the player wants. And if someone appreciates efficiency over aesthetics, the game won't knock you for that. You can get all of the tasks and goals done in each area without worrying about it looking good. Or if you're the type of person who wants it to look nice, because if you want to eventually fully design an area post game, you don't have to worry as much about tearing everything down and re-putting it back up. Then again, if you're just somebody looking to engage in the story and you're not much of a designer, but you love Pokemon and you've always been interested in Animal Crossing, do what needs to get done to move forward in the story. You don't have to worry about how it looks. So I appreciate that they give you a little bit of that leeway. I also appreciate their inclusion of unique forms of already existing Pokemon. Once again, I'm not going to say what they are. I want to avoid spoilers. But I do love how interwoven they are to the overall story of the game. And once again, I think I don't know if they're going to be included in future versions, if they're going to be available in Pokemon Home to some extent, but I do like the specific unique forms for Pokopia. It adds a little bit more magic to the overall experience. It makes it feel a little bit more special and handcrafted. The music, of course, greatest hits collection. You have the Rodom stereo that you can play all of the discs you find of the classic Pokemon music you love and enjoy. But the original soundtrack is rhythmically cozy, and I really had, I didn't really ever feel myself having to go and put the discs into Rodom to play the music I love. I wanted to engage with the original soundtrack, and it is solid. Combining two franchises I tend to lose myself in was a recipe for addiction in the greatest of ways. Animal Crossing was my COVID comfort game. Back when I owned a GameCube, I loved coming back every day to check in on my Animal Crossing neighborhood, and Pokemon has always been something I gravitated towards, with each generation more than others, but I always want to catch all of the Pokemon, learn the names, explore the story. So I had a really good time with that. And this game kind of took both of those things and was like, hey, here's a game to lose yourself in. And it's one of my dream games. It's not something I ever thought I would get or wanted. Animal Crossing meets Pokemon. But Nintendo and Game Freak and the Pokemon Company were like, no, people will want this. The one bummer about this is I think this does create a sizable gap in terms of when we get the next Animal Crossing, because I do think this is going to serve and function as that for Nintendo to provide them time to come out with the new one. I do think, though, this does also shed light on a lot of the shortcomings of the Animal Crossing franchise in terms of load times, accessibility, quality of life features. Now, Pokopia by no means is perfect, but it does add a lot of things that fans of Animal Crossing have much desired. One of them being, when you look in your inventory, you can see the item you're going to be placing down. Whereas with Animal Crossing, it's the green leaf logo for all of them. So you kind of have to remember, well, what does this look like? I don't necessarily remember. And then you have to go through and thumb through all of them to see the name, because you can't see it just by looking at the image of it. So a couple of bummers for Animal Crossing, but I'm glad we have this in the meantime, because I still wasn't sure when we were going to get Animal Crossing regardless. I'm heaping all of this praise on this game, and I'm talking about how much I enjoyed it, but it is arguably the saddest Pokemon title in the series. But in that same breath, it provided some of the most joy, creativity, and hope for the future Pokemon has ever produced, which in that way I think is the reason why it's a special game. I don't know if Pokemon Pokopia is going to win any Game of the Year awards. I don't know if people are going to, in droves, have it as their personal Game of the Year. I don't even know if it's going to be my Game of the Year. But I consider it a very special experience. I do think it's going to land in my personal top 100. It's up there as one of my favorite Pokemon games of all time because, like I previously mentioned, it smashed together, it fusion danced my love of Pokemon and my love of Animal Crossing into an amalgamation of the two. It's going to be a game that I'm going to check in on from time to time over the coming months, over the coming years. The first event with the Hoppip evolutionary line was a nice little palette, a little palette cleanser of what could possibly come in terms of events. It was very surface level. The Dream Island stuff, I think, has a lot of potential in terms of traveling to these other mysterious islands. I think they can add narrative elements there. Who knows, we might get an expansion that is, this game, this isn't a spoiler, this game is centered around the Kanto region, and I wonder if they're going to do expansions in the future that are, or maybe a sequel, that are centered around the Johto region or other regions beyond that. I am very much excited for the future of Pokemon Pokopia, and I am so happy that this game exists. And if you have any interest in, if Animal Crossing was also your COVID game, and maybe you fell out of love with Pokemon, or maybe you're a big Pokemon fan, but you've never really tried the Animal Crossing franchise, I think this, and you are lucky and fortunate enough to have a Switch 2, obviously. I think this is a must-play if you check any of those boxes. I absolutely adore this game, and like I mentioned already a couple of times, I'm so happy it exists. Not a lot to talk about this episode, but I'm hoping you really enjoyed my thoughts on Marathon, my thoughts on Pokemon Pokopia, my discussion on why early access games are no longer for me, and the unfortunate news of Sony raising the price of all of their consoles, as well as the PlayStation Portal accessory. Thank you very much for checking out the Controlled Interest Gamecast. Link to our socials, including Blue Sky, my own personal Blue Sky, as well as the Controlled Interest Blue Sky, and the podcast feeds can be found in the YouTube description and the podcast description. Let me know, if you have played Marathon or Pokopia, your thoughts on those games and your experiences with them. And if you haven't, maybe let me know, do you play early access games or do you avoid them? And if you avoid them, why? Thank you guys, and I'll catch you guys next time. Bye.